Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you.
Well, yeah, we've already got some great questions coming in. And they're still coming in. Fantastic. So one question I'm curious about is, what do you think some of the most common missteps are when it comes to folks adding too much cognitive load to their visualizations? Do you think there's kind of common things that people get tripped up with there?
I can't say what the most common thing is.
Sure.
Right? I obviously, right?
Yeah.
But okay. I would say beyond what I said, which is try to simplify the charts. Obviously, try to simplify the story. Try to clarify the story you're trying to tell. I think two other things I'll add to that are, one, don't make assumptions. Try to question your own assumptions about what somebody's going to already know coming into the chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've been working with this data. You're going to make some assumptions about how they're going to interpret it. Just check your own assumptions. That's obvious, but it bears saying. I guess the other thing I want to point out is simplifying is not always the answer, as I mentioned. Like, I think that you can oversimplify and increase cognitive load because you took away all the labels, because you took away everything that gives somebody context. So yeah. I think that oversimplification is a real danger. Over minimalization is a real danger for cognitive load. And I think that letting people customize their experience of it is probably a really good way. You're not printing. Well, some of you are printing your charts. Well, most of us are doing stuff on the web, right? We have digital. You're not printing your charts, right? Stop treating your chart like it's a static thing. Start giving people options. Dark mode, all these other, changing colors. All these things can be useful.
Sure.
I don't know if I answered the question, but I said something. So.
Yeah. No, it seems very relevant to the question and helpful, if nothing else. John asked a nice question, which was, can you give an example of how one might explain an innovative graph? So, for example, you showed the New York Times spiral chart. Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the New York Times actually did a really great job of explaining it because they put it in context, right? Mm-hmm. Always data visualizations. I'm not sure I said this in the talk. A lot of it got cut out in 20 minutes, but you should always consider what context your chart is being seen in, right? Like your chart probably has a lot of stuff around it that relates to the chart, whether it's the article text, whether it's the explanation of how to interpret it, whether it's screen reader specific, like alt text, or whether it's a summary. Mm-hmm. Consider how would you explain it? You explain it by providing a description, a verbal description of what is going on, right?
Sure.
And I think New York Times.
How do you read it?
That. Like, mm-hmm. I wasn't criticizing New York Times for that. I liked that spiral graph, actually. I know a lot of people mm-hmm. didn't. I thought it was innovative. I thought it was eye-catching. I thought that it was compact, one of the benefits of radial graphs. And I think that when you view it in context, they explain what's going on in the visualization, right? Refer to the visualization in your article. That's another good thing. If your context has an article that goes with it, then actually have a dialogue between the chart and the article, for example, right?
Sure.
Have them refer to one another.
Yeah, sure. Oh gosh, we have so many questions. I'm just looking at what to ask next.
While you're doing that, I'll say
sure.
that explaining. Be looking for the next question, but explain a complex visualization, explain a novel visualization. There's the expertise reversal effect. Some people have already seen this kind of thing and they know how to interpret it, and so over explaining it to them is adding cognitive load to them. Some people haven't. So maybe provide a way for somebody to open up an instruction panel on how to interpret it. That's just
Sure.
one thing you could do.
Yeah, totally. What do you think about machine learning algorithms that auto-annotate insights or patterns as text, i.e. for alt text, for exploratory data tools, for example?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the only answers when you talk about dynamic charts, right? When you don't have anything to hand, like when you yourself don't know what it's going to be. But on the other side, we can go too far into machine learning, right? Machine learning is kind of a black box. You never know exactly what you're going to get out of it, or rather, there's a risk that you don't know exactly what you're going to get out of it, and so you might be misleading somebody, especially if you're using it for, for accessibility purposes. You do want to make sure that you are representing in text the same insights that someone would be getting from it visually, right? You don't want to have two different interpretations. You don't want to mislead somebody.
Sure.
That it says something that it doesn't. So I say yes, absolutely use it with caution, and these things will just get better.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was also a question about, someone said, Alberto Cairo briefly discusses preattentive processing in his book, The Functional Art. Can you discuss preattentive processing in relation to CLT? Yeah,
it's directly applicable. And in longer versions of this talk, I go into great depth on, and actually, if you go on YouTube, I've got presentations where I talk about preattentive attributes and Gestalt attributes, Gestalt patterns. I've got some good slides on that. But basically, preattentive processing are things we don't have to think about. We don't have to think about position. We don't have to think about very small clustering of numbers. We automatically group things in our mind.
Right.
That's what visualization gives to us, right? We don't have to think about those things. Those things just come through. The challenge is, well, there's two things. For cognitive load, it's one, how many interacting elements do you have? How many different things? How many patterns can you are in your visualization are actually taking advantage of preattentive attributes, and how many are not, right? And so if they are not taking advantage of that, then you're adding cognitive load. For blind users, I would say you need to be really explicit about trying to make your text reflect, your alt text or whatever, reflect that kind of instant insight that you would get from preattentive attributes, right?
Sure.
And I'm sorry, I'm not going into depth on preattentive attributes, but you can.
Sounds like you have another talk people can check out.
I have 15 other talks.
Fantastic.
Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, so you had mentioned print earlier, and someone said, does all of this imply visualizations on the web? Can we apply web standards like contrast ratios for digital documents and even print materials?
I mean, sure, because like if you're doing print, it doesn't preclude somebody from, just because you're doing print, it doesn't preclude somebody from typing out alt text. In fact, your problem is kind of solved there, because you're not going to have dynamically printed, unless you're talking about e-ink, right? But you're not going to have dynamically printed charts. You know what's in the chart. You can absolutely.
It's not going to change.
Yeah, it's not. Well, probably not. So you absolutely have an opportunity to really explain what's going on in the chart, and do so in the text, right? Just explain it, right?
Yeah.
There is no alt text in print, but there are still words.
Yeah, totally.
There's text.
Yes, the text.
Yes, use the text. Use your words.
Yeah. So another question was, how does the analytical task impact what causes more or less cognitive load? For example, are there design decisions that would cause more cognitive load for a comparison task versus locating a specific item/data point?
Yeah, actually, I think it's really interesting. I've kind of delved into some of this for, I do work with education, right? And so there's breaking down what tasks need to be accomplished is one of the things that you have to do when you're asking questions about interpreting data viz for for tests, for example, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other topic. I won't be able to give a good answer. What does the analyst? I won't be able to give a good answer. I'd love to dig into that question more deeply, but I will say that there are two different main kinds of visualization, as we know. There's exploratory and explanatory, right? Explanatory, you already know the story. That's data storytelling, right? You already know the story. Just tell the story very clearly. Tell it the best way you can. Exploratory, especially with screen readers, but just in general with cognitive load, it's very easy to find false patterns, right? It's very easy to make mistakes when you're doing or go down the wrong path, right? The wrong branch when you're trying to analyze data. So I would say that making exploratory data visualizations is harder, just in general, because it's a harder task, right? You're trying to discover. You're trying to chop your way with a machete through the jungle, rather than having a guided tour walking you along, right? The guided tour is the easy part.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And I can't answer which specific tasks involve more or less cognitive load, but I would invite you to read the literature around cognitive load theory. That's actually one of the big things I want people to take away is, hey, I'm just exploring these ideas, right? This is not, we are applying a different domain to data visualization. We're applying education to look at the primary literature for cognitive load theory, and understand that cognitive load is more than just, is it a lot to process? There's a lot more going on with cognitive load theory than just, is it heavy to process, right?
Sure. Well, that brings me to this last question I'll bring up, which is just, what additional resources would you recommend for people who want to better understand cognitive load theory as it applies to visualizations or making their visualizations just like more accessible in general?
Well, specifically with cognitive load theory, first off, I want to call out a lot of people. I'll just say Frank Olavsky is doing some really great work here. He and I, he sort of innovated this sort of he's going to kill me. I'm going to say a checkbox, a checklist, right? It's not a checklist. It's a way of thinking. We call it chartability. You can find it on our website, the student's website, chartability. But I would say we're trying to answer some deeper questions about like specific tips and like things you need to consider. For cognitive load theory, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I think probably looking at the literature, and there is actually a lot of literature that specifically has to do with interpreting charts in cognitive load theory. It's just, it's about pedagogy, right? It's about education, right? So I would say learn. I don't think there's a book about cognitive load theory for data visualization, right? That's why this talk was interesting. I hope it was interesting. I'd say go to the literature, the CLT literature.
Cool. Well, that is the time we have. It's time to move on to the next talk. But thank you so much for the talk, Doug, and thanks for joining me for this Q&A.
Thank you for letting me talk today.
Yeah, absolutely. See ya.
Bye-bye.